Good evening, Mr. Ruffin.
Good evening.
How are you doing today?
I'm well. Listen, I woke up this morning. I get to talk about some important information that's very important to me, and so I'm blessed.
Good. As you know, we're in National Reentry Week, so we are so lucky to have you as one of our guests on our three-part Second Chance series, Stepping into New Beginnings. So I would love for you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, my name is Sean Ruffin. I'm one. I want to thank Stark County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. I think this discussion is very propitious. The timing of which is interesting because we're seeing how people of color generally are treated by the legal system or the criminal justice or criminal injustice system, some may call it. But nonetheless, as I talk about myself, my name is Sean Ruffin. I'm from Stark County. I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio. My background is in the practice of law. Graduated from the Ohio State Moritz College of Law in 1997. Practiced in a variety of areas, but in 2007, I died twice and came back to Canton, Ohio. Started practicing there, did a little work there, and have since moved to Columbus, and so that's where I'm settling right now. We'll see where the Lord moves me in the future.
Okay, well, we're going to dig a little deeper in that topic. Why are you interested in this field of work and why did you get involved?
Um, Oftentimes kids are asked, what do you want to be when you grow up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the case for me, like most kids. I was born in 1969 on the heels of the civil rights movement. Uh, a lot of African countries were exerting their independence. And so even at a young age, I think some of that stuff filtered into me. I was probably too young really to understand it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know that we give our kids enough credit. Uh, they're aware, and I believe that I was aware. You might hear references when your parents are talking. Now, many of us were told to get out of grown folks' business. But
Yes.
as you walked out of the kitchen, you might have heard something.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up right on the right off of Tusk in Stark County, Ohio, southeast end of the city, and ended up being bused when I was in the fourth grade. I was bused to an elementary school called Woodland Elementary. I, I I don't think that it's called Woodland anymore, but nonetheless, that gave me an insight into how other folks lived, interacted, and who they were. Most of the kids in my school, which was Belden Elementary, were people who looked like me. When I went to Woodland, uh, those not everybody looked like me. Now there were a couple of us, but most of the majority of the folk with whom I went to school were a little bit different. So I grew up wanting to be a lawyer. Um, in 2006, my license was snatched by the Ohio Supreme Court for child support. Okay. And it was at that time that I recognized the value of a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted a second chance. I needed a second chance because this was my lifelong dream to be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And when that was taken away from me, man, you can only imagine how I felt.
Right.
And so, when I talked about dying twice in 2007, when I came back to Canton, this was after having worked in large law firm up in Cleveland for years. But I came back to Canton and I started representing folks who were arguably on the margins of society, individuals They weren't companies, they weren't political subdivisions, municipalities, and school boards. These were individuals who were getting by day to day, possibly losing kids or at risk of losing kids or losing their liberty, representing folks in family court, representing folks in the criminal court. And once again, I recognize the importance of
Right.
second chances. And it's not unlike what many of us probably have experienced. It's just that we haven't experienced it in the legal system. I
Mhm.
mentioned mine was a professional second chance. Um, Others might be a second chance with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or spouse. It might be a reset with your vocation. So that is really the reason why I'm interested in the area. When I talked about helping those who are marginalized, I noticed that the system didn't work for a lot of folks. Okay, so there are a lot of folks who were getting charged or stopped, as we see every day, stopped for an air freshener on your rearview mirror, or stopped for a light that was out on your license plate. Pretextual stops. So bad stops, bad searches, bad arrests, bad charges and indictments, to bad convictions and sentences all the way through the system. The system is flawed. Now, don't get me wrong, it may be one of the best systems that we have, but it still could use some improvement. And
Mhm.
so as a result, I know because of the numbers, in the law, we talk about disproportionate impact.
Yeah.
Black folks, particularly, are about 13% of the population, but we make up about 50% of the incarcerated. And so these systems have a disproportionate impact on people who look like me. And that's the crux of the matter when it comes to why I'm interested in this reentry space.
Okay, so when you're working in this space, you're saying you work with reentry, but you also work with other areas, just that those people who are not represented. So it's not just reentry, you're kind of well-rounded here.
Well, I'd like to think that I am well-rounded. So much of, at least when in this, I wouldn't have called myself a reentry practitioner then, but over time, the time that I was doing the criminal work, I was often doing judicial release motion. I was often doing things to connect people who were coming back to the community to certain resources.
Okay.
That's just a part of the work that we have to do, and it's layered, it's complicated, and you can't do it all. But my hope is that we can all do a little, and then if we all do a little, we can have a great impact.
Well, you just mentioned that there were like some challenges and barriers. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges and barriers that you face to the success of this work?
I can, and that is, and I apologize for covering my mouth, but that is a deep subject because we have been oppressed in this country. Black folks in particular have been oppressed for 400 plus years. And so unraveling that psychology of oppression is a humongous challenge. Um, and so some people may have thought when you ask that question, or may think when you ask that question, you know, is it the housing?
Right.
Is it the transportation? Is it the employment? Is it, getting your driver's license? Those aren't the issues. The issues are self-worth, confidence, self-esteem, to feel like you've got some value. Those are the major challenges, in my opinion. Um, and so that's unraveling all of that trauma and toxicity that people have undergone in their lives from childhood sometimes to adulthood, um, is a humongous challenge. Now, as it relates to some of the things that I've discussed, as it relates to housing and transportation, employment, I think housing for a particular demographic of justice involved individuals is the sex offender space, that sex offender demographic. That might be one of the most challenging areas, is to get sex offenders affordable and convenient housing. We're quick to banish them to the outskirts of our counties, the scarlet letter. And so what I want to impress upon people is that we have people who live right next door to us who have just not been caught doing some of the same stuff that people who have gotten caught who are now branded sex offenders. They can live next to schools, they can go to playgrounds, they can drive buses, cut hair, and do all kinds of stuff because they've just not been caught. Recently, there was a very high profile personality in the Columbus area, been on TV for approximately 30 years, who has just been put to jail, but lived an affluent lifestyle. It just not been caught. And so that's one of the challenges that I think we also are facing, is changing the perception of criminals and, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said criminals, justice involved individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So our legislators, they take up these measures because it's political.
Mm-hmm.
It makes them look good. They get votes because of this popular stance. But is it really making an impact? Is it really making an impact to send a sex offender to the outskirts of the community? Probably not. You're probably making it worse because at some point they've got to come into the city to work or to go to school or to whatever it is they're doing. So they're going to be around folks anyway. But if they don't have adequate transportation, what do they do? How do they get to the bus stop? Do they walk past the school? They got to go around. So you really have to think about some of these things very, very seriously, because I don't think that we are really making a difference with a lot of the legislation that we're passing. So as it relates to the question, again, I think unraveling some of the toxicity would be first, but also thinking about how and reframing, reimagining how we think about justice involved individuals.
It's something that you said, correcting the language, excuse me, correcting the language that we use, because the word criminal versus justice involved, it's two different things, and it gives you a different feeling when you hear those terms. So it was brought to my attention the same thing, that it's important that we do start using a different language so that we can kind of perceive people in a different manner. You get that stigma, you get those labels put on you, and regardless if it was, a little offense or whatever, it's still the same dynamic when you're called certain things. So
One
I
of the things
appreciate your correction.
and I apologize for talking over you, but one of the
Okay.
things that I made a point to do when I was in court, uh, referring to my clients, is, we call the state, the plaintiff or the prosecution, and often would call the accused the defendant. And so I stopped calling them the defendant. I started calling my clients the accused. Now, I don't know what impact that might have, but I thought that it might have an impact on folks who were the triers of fact. In our legal system, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're simply accused. They're not convicted. They're simply accused. That doesn't say anything about the merits of the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're absolutely right. I think we have to be very, very aware of the language that we use. And you're seeing that in all areas. I mean, many employers now, for example, are on the diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice kind of platform. They're bringing it into their workspaces. And so a lot of that space has to do with the language that we employ.
Okay, well, just to circle back around to the legislative part, you might have a great suggestion here. So what are some of the legislative reform that you feel is needed for the success of returning citizens?
This is a
Loaded
long road.
question.
It is. It really is. It
Yeah.
really is. And so, uh, as it relates to legislative actions, I think it's important. One, I'm very involved in voter education and engagement, mobilization. And so, one, you've got to put people in office who think like you, who can relate to your experience. Um, because if not, they will continue to get what we've always got. Two, I think that legislators need to hear our voices. They need to know what it is, how we're thinking.
Mhm.
And so, hey, city councilman or county commissioner or state rep, what are your thoughts about this issue? These are my thoughts. What are your thoughts about these issues? Mayor such and such or whomever they are. I think that that's important. Uh, all politics are local. And, I've been to the General Assembly and I've talked to legislators about the power of just small groups of people. If a legislator thinks that you've got 100 votes, that's enough to swing an election in this state. That's enough to swing an election in this state. Part of the problem with our communities is that we've lost faith in the political system. And so oftentimes you find folks who think that it's not important to vote, their vote doesn't matter. But I'm here to say that if a legislator thinks that you have a group of or a block of 100 votes, their ears will perk up and they will listen. Now it doesn't, people on different sides of the aisles operate differently, but that certainly would be a cadre of people that I think would get that it would at least get an audience with that legislator.
Okay.
So that didn't answer your question specifically. Uh, as it relates to specific things, I think again, as how we think about sex offenders, how we think about um, the legal system generally. We show our priorities by where we place our money. Okay, so we if we say to legislators, you're not spending any money on the front end. I think Frederick Douglass may have said it. I'm not certain to who to attribute it, but said that it's easier to build strong children than to build or repair broken men.
Wow.
Okay,
Mhm.
and so if we're telling our legislators, if we're telling our school board members, our city council people, we want more recreation programs or whatever at the front end. We want more money to our schools at the front end. We do we push the ball halfway down the field with just more money towards education. Right now, we're spending probably 2.5 times, if not more, and I don't know the numbers, on on incarceration and prisons than we are in education. And so we've got to let folks know that that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. I think if we do our part at the front end, we will, alleviate a lot of problems on the back end.
Okay, so is that how you feel like Stark County as a community could help with this initiative? Give us some like action steps we should take. I hear you saying about the voting, basically getting people in power. What are some other action steps the community can take to be a part of this change and to be a part of the success of these returning citizens?
Sure. So if there are people, if you know people who are like-minded, one, I think you've got to start convening and talking about these issues.
Okay.
Um, there was a killing in Minneapolis just last week, Dante, maybe it was this week, Dante Wright, right in the midst of this Derek Chauvin trial, where, the trial about this police officer who sat and kneeled on the neck of a man for 9 minutes, just down the street, because he had an air freshener on his rearview mirror. They stopped this young man, Dante Wright. So I heard a state rep speaking about that issue, and he said one of his good friends was Philando Castile. Philando Castile was killed a couple of years ago. CCW permit holder announced that when he was pulled over and was killed in front of his wife or girlfriend and his child. As a result of that experience, and the day before, this state legislator said he was talking to Philando Castile, and then the next day, the following day, he was killed. He said at that time he thought, I've got to take action, take matters into my own hands. And now he's a state legislator, and I think that that's what we have to do. So when you find like-minded people, who's interested in being an advocate, who's interested in pushing for these issues, and so if you find somebody interested, you jump behind them and push them to the state legislator or whatever, city council or school board, but we've got to be active. And so those are the action steps that I really think are important. I think that they would be fruitful, despite the fact that many folks are dismayed and disenchanted. But I think that there's some value in being involved in the process. Then the other thing is, if you find groups or find people who are doing the work, support them, refer people to them. If, we probably all have been affected by someone who needs a second chance, whatever that second chance may be. It may not be from incarceration. It might be substance abuse. It might be mental health. But if you know somebody who's working in that space, refer those folks to those resources. If you can, support them with financial donations. There's a lot of work out here to be done, and it takes money to do it. And so those are the action steps that I think that I would implore people to use.
Well, I totally appreciate this. This has been very enlightening for me. And even some of the suggestions that you gave, I feel like it gave me a different way to think about things. So I'm hoping it will do the same to our community, and that we can continue to have these conversations, and just one step at a time, one group at a time, that we can make change. So thank you again for joining us tonight.
Man, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it, and I love that you guys are in this space.
Well, thank you. Have a good night.
All right, have a good one.